Hi everyone, my name is Kimberly Koerth and I'm a senior in the Women and Gender Studies program here at Arizona State University. I'm going to be talking to you today about Sara Ahmed's work on the affective body, specifically her theory of the performativity of disgust from her 2004 book, The Cultural Politics of Emotion. I just got back from the National Women's Studies Association's annual conference, which was held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin this year. Sara Ahmed, who is a professor of race and cultural studies and the director of the Center for Feminist Research at Goldsmiths, University of London, was the keynote speaker for the conference. Ahmed gave a talk about fragility, which is both a physical state and an emotional state. And although her keynote focused on her most recent work, which is long removed from the cultural politics of emotion, I think the two still share some link. Disgust is seen by society as a powerful emotion, one that accompanies a strong action or reaction, and one that gives power to the person feeling disgusted. But because of that, it also relates to fragility. It makes the object of disgust feel fragile, and in fact, it comes from a place of personal fragility and weakness as well. Disgust masks our uncomfortableness with a topic or a situation. So, in the fourth chapter of The Cultural Politics of Emotion, Ahmed begins with a series of questions about our experiences with disgust. She writes, quote, "What does it mean to feel utter disgust? Why do some things seem more disgusting than others? Are we necessarily disgusted by the same things, and can we recognize when another is plainly disgusted by what they do with their body?" End quote. Notably, each of these questions focus in on the experience of being disgusted, and with the last question in particular, the ways this experience is performed through our bodies. I'll pose a situation of my own. Think of something that disgusts you. Maybe it's the smell of garbage cans in an alley, or walking into the bathroom and seeing that the toilet hasn't been flushed. Maybe it's spoiled food in the fridge, or, as Julia Kristeva references in Powers of Horror, her work theorizing about the object, the skin that forms on the surface of warm milk. Whatever it is, picture how you react to this stimulus. You might cover your nose or eyes. You might express your disgust audibly, saying, "Ew, that's gross." You might turn away. In The Performativity of Disgust, Ahmed cites four key elements of the disgust experience that she attributes to Paul Rosen and April E. Fallon. There is a characteristic facial expression, an appropriate action, a distinctive physiological manifestation, and a characteristic feeling state. Each of these reactions is an example of the ways we perform a response to disgust. Notably, disgust is never without context. It doesn't occur in a vacuum. We experience disgust as a response to an object of some sort. It never manifests by itself or in the abstract. Disgust relies on a series of factors in order to be present, including context, appearance, and connotation. As Ahmed writes, quote, "Disgust reads the objects that are felt to be disgusting. It is not just about bad objects that we are afraid to incorporate, but the very designation of badness as a quality we assume is inherent in those objects." End quote. It is this inherency that is perhaps the most damaging, particularly in the context of disgust and body. Once something is labeled as disgusting, labeled as bad, it is capable of forever existing with that distinction. Even in a situation where a person or object shouldn't be seen as disgusting, they might still be seen that way due to past experience. This reduces the person's agency, or ability to act and exert power. In our class, we talked about this in regard to transgender bodies, but it can be applied in many different ways. Another example I was thinking about is fat bodies. People who are fat are read as having literally no control over themselves and their bodies. They are assigned to a place of precarious health and well-being by others, and familiar reactions of disgust are manifested in response to their presence, particularly in places we typically associate with thin people. Think about fat people dancing, or a fat person wearing a bikini, or even the shock that model Tess Holliday, who is a size 22, created when she was signed by Milk Model Management earlier this year, making her the largest plus-size model to be signed to a mainstream modeling agency. Our social scripts surrounding fatness ignore the big secret, though, that many fat people are happy being fat. Their contentedness and even joy in their bodies has radical potential and certainly achieves agency for them, but that agency is still denied by other people's reactions and the oppressive forces of society. Ahmed writes, quote, "If disgust is about gut feelings, then our relation to our guts is not direct, but is mediated by ideas that are already implicated in the very impressions we make of others and the way those impressions surface as bodies." End quote. We can never accept people or their bodies at face value. No pun intended. Our context for their realities override what we might call an organic impression. In Ahmed's theorization, disgust goes hand in hand with desire. We are drawn toward the same object that is pushing us away. We are fascinated with that which we don't understand, and on the surface, don't want to understand. Disgust is often manufactured as a mask or disguise for our desires, which is why some of the biggest homophobes turn out to be closeted gay men themselves. We protect ourselves by reversing our natural reaction to objects, and as Ahmed says, quote, "The contradictory impulses of desire and disgust do not necessarily resolve themselves, and they do not take us to the same place." End quote. We can think of disgust as an invading force, as something which enters into our space, be that physical or figurative space, and does not immediately leave. It must be forced out, or worse, it forces us out in response to it. Quote, "Disgust does not end with the proximity of such contact," end quote, Ahmed writes. Often, it is not the object of disgust that is disgusting, but its proximity to ourselves. This can be easily depicted with the childhood concept of the personal bubble. Each person's existence is fine as long as it doesn't infringe on our own existence. Going back to my earlier example of fat bodies, we don't necessarily mind the existence of fat people. What disgusts us is their relation in regard to ourselves. We are driven to disgust by our desire for them or to be like them. Our disgust wants them to come nearer, so it forces them farther away. Our disgust is a defense mechanism, and they are seen as a threat or danger to ourselves, to our way of living. We think we have it all figured out. We don't want to have to be forced to change. Finally, Ahmed concludes by coming back to the specific performativity of disgust in her view. She references Judith Butler's theories on performativity, particularly in regard to gender, and talks about the speech acts that bring the disgusting object into existence. Ahmed writes, quote, "The speech act is never simply an address the subject makes to itself. The speech act is always spoken to others, whose shared witnessing of the disgusting thing is required for the affect to have an effect." End quote. In other words, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? If an object is disgusting and no one is around to observe it, does it really disgust? Therefore, the experience of disgust is a shared one. It is dependent on the agreement of others to our reaction. Because our expressions of disgust come from a place of fragility, by uttering them, we are seeking affirmation from those around us. What is the implication of us being wrong about what disgusts? If we mislabel that which disgusts, are we then a potential source of disgust ourselves? By recognizing the potential and experience of disgust in others, and by locating that sensation specifically within them, we are guarding ourselves against being perceived as the disgusting one. We are constructing our identities in regard to those of the people around us and establishing our positions as the ones in possession of agency, the ones being perceived as acting on others. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks for listening, everyone, and let me know if you have any questions about my video or Ahmed's theories on disgust and emotion. I definitely recommend reading The Cultural Politics of Emotion, as well as the rest of her books. Lastly, check out her blog at feministkilljoys.com. Thanks again.